"Give me the keys," my daughter-in-law said, holding out her hand in front of 20 family members. "This house is going to belong to us anyway." The room went silent. Even my own son looked at me like I was the one making things difficult. I slowly closed my purse, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Let's wait until someone reads the paperwork." She laughed. 3 weeks later, the bank manager asked all of us to come in. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I'm 38 years old. For most of my life, I believed that working hard was enough. I wasn't rich, I wasn't glamorous, I didn't drive a luxury SUV or wear expensive jewelry. I worked as a medical billing specialist at our local hospital, where my days were filled with insurance forms, patient files, and helping people solve problems they didn't understand. It wasn't exciting work, but it paid my bills honestly. The house everyone suddenly wanted wasn't something I inherited from wealthy parents. I earned it. My late husband Daniel and I bought it when we were both 26. It wasn't much back then. The roof leaked every spring, the kitchen cabinets were falling apart, and every weekend we spent fixing something ourselves because we couldn't afford contractors. When Daniel passed away after a short illness 6 years ago, I thought losing him would be the hardest thing I'd ever survive. I was wrong. Raising our son Ethan alone while paying the mortgage nearly broke me. I worked overtime whenever the hospital offered extra hours. I skipped vacations. I wore the same winter coat for 5 years because buying a new one felt selfish. Still, I never complained. Every payment brought me one step closer to owning that home free and clear. I thought Ethan understood. When he married Brittany 2 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. I helped plan the wedding. I paid for flowers they couldn't afford. I even watched their dog whenever they traveled. At first, Brittany seemed kind. Then little things started changing. She'd walk through my home and say things like, "This room would look bigger if someone knocked out this wall." Or she'd laugh and tell Ethan, "When this place is ours, we're definitely replacing these old floors." She always said it with a smile. Everyone else laughed. I smiled too. But deep down, those words stayed with me. The family reunion that changed everything happened in early July. Every year I hosted it because my backyard was large enough for everyone. I spent 2 days preparing food. I grilled chicken, made potato salad from my grandmother's recipe, baked fresh peach cobbler, and filled coolers with drinks. By noon, cousins, nieces, nephews, and neighbors filled the yard. Children laughed near the swing set. Music played softly from speakers on the porch. For a little while, everything felt normal. Then Brittany stood up while everyone was finishing lunch. She tapped her glass with a fork. "I've been thinking," she announced with a bright smile. The conversation stopped. "I think Lauren deserves a break." Several relatives nodded politely. Brittany continued, "Maintaining a house this size is stressful. Ethan and I have decided we'll take over." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled wider. "You've done enough. Just give us the house keys. We'll start moving things next month." Someone chuckled nervously. I waited for Ethan to correct her. He didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "Mom, maybe it's time." I stared at him. "Time for what?" "You don't need all this space." My stomach tightened. "This is still my home." Brittany folded her arms. "You'll always have a room." "A room." "Not my home." "A room." The words hit harder than I expected. I looked around the yard. Some relatives avoided eye contact. Others watched like they were waiting for a show. Then Brittany stepped closer. So she said, holding out her hand, "The keys." I slipped my hand into my purse and wrapped my fingers around them. The key said, Every key carried a memory.
The front door.
The garage Daniel built himself. The small shed where Ethan learned to ride his first bike. Those weren't just keys. They were pieces of my life. I'm not giving anyone my house, I said calmly. Her smile disappeared. You're being selfish. I don't think so. You can't live there forever. I wasn't planning on leaving today. A few people laughed. Not many. Brittany's face turned red. She raised her voice. Everyone knows Ethan deserves this house more than you do. That sentence hurt more than anything else she'd ever said. Because my own son didn't disagree. Instead, he sighed. Mom, we're just trying to think about the future. I nodded slowly. So am I. The afternoon never recovered. People packed leftovers into containers without much conversation. Children kept playing, unaware of the tension surrounding the adults. As everyone left, Brittany hugged relatives and acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Before getting into her car, she looked back at me. You'll change your mind. I simply locked my front door after they drove away. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt lonely. That night I walked through every room. I touched the kitchen counter Daniel had installed himself. I ran my hand across the hallway where Ethan's childhood height marks were still hidden behind a picture frame. How had we reached this point? How had my son gone from proudly helping me paint these walls to quietly expecting me to hand them over? I barely slept. The next morning at work, I struggled to focus. Insurance claims blurred together on my computer screen. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my bank. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello, Mrs. Mitchell, the woman asked politely. Yes, this is Karen from First Community Bank. We'd like to schedule a meeting with you regarding the deed to your property. My heart skipped. The deed? Yes. Is something wrong? There was a brief pause. I think it's best if we discuss everything in person. I thanked her and ended the call. For several seconds, I simply stared at my phone. I didn't know whether to feel afraid or relieved. But one thing became clear. Whatever was coming next had nothing to do with house keys. It had everything to do with the truth hidden inside the paperwork. I sat in my car after work for nearly 20 minutes before starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but my mind kept replaying Brittany's words. Give us the keys. It wasn't just what she had said. It was the confidence behind it. She hadn't asked. She had expected me to obey. That evening, my phone buzzed again. It was Ethan. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Hi, Brittany and I were thinking. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. I'd say that's one way to describe it. He laughed awkwardly. Can we stop by tomorrow night? What for? Just to talk. I wanted to believe him. All right. The next evening they arrived carrying a pie from the grocery store. Brittany smiled as though the reunion had never happened. I hope you're not still upset, she said while placing the pie on the counter. I'm listening. Ethan cleared his throat. We've been looking at houses. That's good. But prices are crazy. I nodded. They are. Brittany leaned forward. Which is why your house makes the most sense. There it was again. Not your home. Their solution. She pulled a folder from her purse. We even made a budget. I looked at the papers without touching them. You planned my future without asking me? We're planning the family's future. She corrected. I'm part of this family. Of course you are. Then why does every plan end with me giving something up? Neither of them answered. Instead, Ethan spoke softly. Mom, you'd be happier in a condo. You've already decided that. We're just being practical. I looked around my own kitchen. The refrigerator still had Ethan's kindergarten drawing held up by an old magnet. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. This wasn't just a building. It was my life. I've made my decision, I said. I'm staying. Brittany's smile disappeared. You're being unreasonable. No. I'm setting a boundary. She stood abruptly. Fine. They left without eating the pie they had brought. I watched their taillights disappear down the street. The next morning, things became stranger. My cousin Melissa called. I heard you're selling the house. What? That's what Brittany told everyone. I closed my eyes. I'm not selling anything. She made it sound like the paperwork was already started. By lunchtime, 3 more relatives had called with the same question. The rumor was spreading faster than I could stop it. I finally texted Ethan. Why are people saying I'm selling my house? His reply came several minutes later. I didn't tell anyone that. A minute later, another message arrived. Brittany probably misunderstood what we discussed. Misunderstood? No. She was creating pressure. If enough people believed the story, maybe I'd feel embarrassed enough to give in. Instead, I started saving everything. Every text, every voicemail, every email. I created a folder on my laptop labeled property. At first, I wasn't even sure why. Something inside me simply said, keep records. A week later, Ethan invited me to dinner at their apartment. I almost declined. Then I decided I needed to see what was really happening. Dinner started pleasantly enough. We talked about work. We talked about the weather. Then Brittany casually slid a real estate magazine across the table. This development has beautiful condos. I didn't touch it. I'm not moving. She sighed dramatically. Lauren, don't make this harder than it has to be. I didn't realize it was hard. It is for Ethan. I looked at my son. He stared at his plate. You know, Brittany continued, normal parents want to help their children. I have helped. You could help more. By giving away my house. It's not giving it away. What would you call it? She smiled. Keeping it in the family. I almost laughed. It already is. Silence settled over the table. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Each second felt louder than the last. Finally, Ethan spoke. Mom? Yes? If something happened to you tomorrow, the house would eventually come to me anyway. His words stunned me. So now we're planning my funeral. No, that's not what I meant. It sounded exactly like that. I stood. I think it's time for me to leave. Neither of them tried to stop me. Driving home, I realized something painful. They weren't waiting patiently for the future. They were trying to rush it. The following Monday, I kept my appointment at First Community Bank. Karen, the bank manager, greeted me warmly. Mrs. Mitchell? Thank you for coming. She led me into a quiet office. Stacks of files lined one wall. The room smelled faintly of paper and fresh coffee. She opened a folder. We noticed several recent inquiries regarding your property. My stomach tightened. Inquiries? Someone has been asking questions about ownership requirements. I haven't. I know. She folded her hands. That's why we contacted you. Who made the inquiries? I'm sorry, but I can't disclose names. My pulse quickened. Were they trying to transfer ownership? Not directly. She chose her words carefully. They appeared interested in understanding what would be required. I sat silently. Karen looked at me with genuine concern. I always tell homeowners the same thing. What's that? If anyone pressures you regarding property, dropping everything, says decision.
If one tonight, not wait.
If anyone pressures you regarding property, document everything.
Almost so bad, but please see your detail. Steve, this fast rated the quilts missing. Hawkish power sleep. This thing should I cross off under me.
I see Sama and his Torma.
Betrayal requests, emotional guilt, false urgency, public pressure. I had experienced every single one. Karen looked at me again.
Mrs. Mitchell, I think you should speak with an attorney before discussing this property with anyone else.
I nodded slowly. I know exactly who to call. For the first time since the reunion, I didn't feel helpless. I felt prepared.
They believed I was alone. They believed I would eventually give up. They had no idea I had already begun protecting everything they were trying to take. Lauren's lawyer was someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Richard Hale, and he had helped Daniel and me with our wills shortly after we bought the house. He was older now, his hair almost completely white, but his handshake was just as firm as I remembered.
I'm sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances,
he said after I explained everything.
I wish I were here for a happier reason.
He listened without interrupting while I showed him every text message, every voicemail, and every email I'd saved.
When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. You did exactly the right thing. I wasn't even sure why I kept everything. Because your instincts knew something wasn't right.
He spent nearly an hour reviewing the documents. Then he opened the original file Daniel and I had signed years earlier.
I think there's something your son doesn't know.
He slid one page toward me. Daniel and I had added a legal provision after paying off the mortgage. The property could never be transferred under pressure or questionable circumstances without a full legal review. Daniel had insisted on that clause after watching one of his relatives lose a home through family manipulation. I felt tears fill my eyes.
He was protecting me.
Richard smiled gently. He loved you enough to think ahead. Over the next 2 weeks, Brittany became even bolder. She sent listings for retirement communities. She texted, "Have you packed anything yet?" She even told relatives that I was finally coming around. I never argued. I simply saved every message. One afternoon, Ethan called. "Mom, the bank agreed to meet with us next Friday." With us. They said everyone should be there. I'll be there. He sounded relieved. I knew you'd make the right decision. I didn't answer. Friday arrived. The conference room at First Community Bank was larger than I expected. Karen, the bank manager, greeted everyone politely. Richard sat beside me. Across the table were Ethan and Brittany. Brittany wore a bright smile. She looked like someone expecting congratulations. Karen began. Thank you all for coming. She placed the property file on the table. Richard folded his hands. Before we discuss ownership, I'd like to review several documents. Brittany frowned. What documents? The communication between you and Mrs. Mitchell. Richard began reading. One text after another. You're too old for that house. Think about your grandchildren. Everyone agrees you should move. Don't make this difficult. The room became painfully quiet. Brittany shifted in her chair. Those were only suggestions. Richard continued. Then he played 2 saved voicemails. Everyone heard Brittany demanding the keys. Everyone heard her say the house would belong to them soon. Karen looked directly at Brittany. Mrs. Carter, these conversations raise serious concerns. Brittany's confidence disappeared. You can't use private messages against me. Richard calmly replied. They demonstrate a pattern of pressure. Ethan looked stunned. You recorded calls. I kept evidence. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't know she sent all those messages. I looked at him carefully. You knew enough. He lowered his eyes. Richard opened another folder. There's one more matter. He placed the deed on the table. This property contains a protective clause added years ago. Karen nodded. I've reviewed it. Richard continued. Any attempt to transfer ownership while the owner is experiencing documented family pressure requires immediate legal review and may invalidate the process. Brittany's face turned pale. What does that mean? It means, Richard answered, that Mrs. Mitchell remains the sole decision maker. Karen added, no transfer will occur today. Silence filled the room. Finally, Brittany whispered, this isn't fair. I looked at her calmly. No, as growl glubid your gangated. This property contains a protective clause added years ago. Karen nodded. I've reviewed it. Richard continued. Any attempt to transfer ownership while the owner is experiencing documented family pressure requires immediate legal review and may invalidate the process. Brittany's face turned pale. What does that mean? It means, Richard answered, that Mrs. Mitchell remains the sole decision maker. Karen added, no transfer will occur today. Silence filled the room. Finally, Brittany whispered, this isn't fair. I looked at her calmly. No, I paused. What wasn't fair was expecting me to surrender the home I spent decades earning. She opened her mouth again. Richard raised one hand. This meeting is over. Karen closed the file. Mrs. Mitchell, your ownership remains fully protected. I stood. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt light. Outside the bank, Ethan caught up with me. Mom. I stopped. I'm sorry. I searched his face. He looked ashamed. I should have stood up for you. Yes. I let things go too far. You did. He wiped his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I won't. His expression fell. But that doesn't mean never. He nodded quietly. I'll earn it. Brittany walked past us without saying a word. She climbed into their car and stared straight ahead. The confidence she carried into the bank had disappeared. News of the meeting spread through the family within days. Relatives who had stayed silent suddenly called to apologize. Some admitted they believed the rumors. Others confessed they simply didn't want to get involved. I accepted their words politely. But I also remembered who had remained silent when I needed them most. A month later, I updated my estate plans. Richard helped me make every decision carefully. This time, I made sure my wishes were impossible to misunderstand. No assumptions. No pressure. No confusion. Just clear instructions. Life slowly became peaceful again. Saturday mornings returned to gardening. Evenings were spent reading on the back porch Daniel had built with his own hands. The house felt like home again. Not because I had won. Because I had finally stopped apologizing for protecting what I had earned. Ethan still called every Sunday. Sometimes we talked for 5 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. It rarely is. But real change begins when someone accepts responsibility instead of making excuses. Looking back now, I realize the strongest lock on my front door was never made of steel. It was learning that kindness doesn't require surrender. Helping family doesn't mean giving away your future. And love without respect will always leave the door open for someone to take more than they deserve. If my story reminds you of a time someone tried to pressure you into giving up something you worked hard for, I hope you remember this. You don't have to raise your voice to protect your peace. Sometimes the strongest answer is simply saying, no, then standing by it.